All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to the Boca Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Holritz. Happy Monday to you. For those of you that are live streaming with us today, I hope you had a good weekend. Mine was quite good, quite relaxing. Nice to kind of hit the reset button and then launch hardcore into this week. And I hope you'll join me. Let's make something really good out of this week. If you are live streaming with us, make sure as well that you take advantage of the opportunity to have a conversation with myself and our brand new guest who I'm going to introduce here in just a second. But take advantage of this platform. You can, whether you're on Facebook or on youtube.com/Boca Podcast, you can ask questions, you can comment on the conversation at hand. And I would encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity. That's really one of the main benefits of this live streaming or these live streaming platforms. And then for those of you that are listening to the audio version after the fact, of course, make sure that you're following us on Instagram at bocapodcast.com or at Boca Podcast. And certainly you can go to bocapodcast.com and see some of the latest episodes, the show notes as well. Take advantage of that. But come join us in these conversations. And again, take advantage of this opportunity to have a conversation with our guests. And then before I introduce our guests, one other note, as I promised you I would do before every episode, I made my donation to Charity Water today. That little receipt is up there on the screen. You can see it for those of you that are live streaming. But again, I just do this as a way to encourage everybody listening in and watching to look for opportunities to give back. I know it's kind of a crazy world out there, and we're uncertain and unsure, but if we're in a position where we have a computer or a phone that costs thousands of dollars, I think we can figure out ways to give you a few bucks here and there, whether it's to local organizations or, of course, those bigger international ones as well. So I encourage you to do that today. And on that note, I want to go ahead and introduce our brand new guest today. Sarah LaRae from Sarah LaRae Photography is here with me. Hey, Sarah, thanks for coming to hang out with me.
Of course. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, and it's kind of funny because we're local to each other and yet we're still doing this podcast remotely. I think it just ends up working well for the sake of managing cameras and so forth. But I also kind of miss some of that in-person conversation. We originally connected through in-person conversation at a local photographer get-together here in Chattanooga, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Feels like a while ago after COVID nonsense, but the Thursday brunches, well, they were always super fun.
They were, yeah, and I do miss that, and maybe we can kind of get those things going again. It was interesting, though, something I observed. I'm curious to get your take on this, being a local photographer as well. Even before the pandemic hit as hard as it did, it seemed like photographers were less willing to venture out of their homes, even for like a 15, 20-minute drive across town to go grab coffee or to meet for lunch like you were talking about. And I don't know, that really bummed me out because it seemed like no longer were those in-person connections and relationships being prioritized, maybe like we used to. What are your thoughts on that and the importance of that for the sake of our photography community?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was kind of hard and, like you said, before the pandemic, even to get people to come out just because people are so super busy. And I think especially a lot of photographers, like they don't, especially when they're starting out, the idea of community over competition and how networking with other photographers can be just such a huge benefit to you and your business.
Yeah, yeah.
Some of my best friends that I have now are people that I met and connected with at some of those brunches. And just sharing information with each other and all those things. But yeah, I think the pandemic has changed people's like perception of like new people and meeting people. And I feel like a lot of people, especially introverts, are almost more comfortable in a post-pandemic world. And so, where it was a stretch they maybe would have pushed themselves before, the pandemic has sort of given them license to, it's more acceptable, I guess, to not push your boundaries a little bit.
That's interesting, though, because, I mean, as business owners, we really don't have a choice but to engage with people that we don't know, right? That's just part of doing business. You meet somebody, you offer your services to them, and hopefully you have the opportunity to book them and work with them. There are a lot of photographers in the industry who are self-proclaimed introverts, yet as you pointed out, in many cases, we'll use that as kind of reason not to get out and connect, and not just with potential clients, but in this case, even with potential photographer or with other photographers who potentially could add a lot of value, not only through the form of just a genuine relationship, but also advice and suggestions and ideas and camaraderie and support. And I understand that we're all like, we all have different backgrounds. And so we have this kind of psychological makeup that varies from person to person. But I've been in the industry long enough now too to see the detriment of going inward and just kind of focusing on yourself, and or maybe getting a little obsessed with our tendencies, i.e. introversion or extroversion, and letting that get in the way of the opportunity to make real connection in person. And I was just really bummed to see that. I remember there was a post, I think in our local group, where somebody was complaining about having to drive like 20 minutes across town. They were saying it was too far. And I know you talk about people saying that that they're too busy, but at the end of the day, we make time for what we prioritize. And I want to encourage photography communities, certainly the local one, but also those listening nationally or internationally, make the effort, go above and beyond, if that's what it feels like, to get out and connect with somebody and have a conversation in person, because there are so many benefits on the other side of that. That's how my whole career in the photography industry grew, was on the backs of connection with, or in the back of connection with other photographers. And if we pull back from that and we go inward, it's going to hurt our business potentially, but it also hurt us kind of psychologically and emotionally as well. I think we're missing out. What do you think?
Oh yeah, I agree 110%. And for me, pandemic was especially hard with me being a more extroverted person. It was, more emotionally taxing to be so isolated, and I definitely I miss that. I want us to get back to that for sure.
Yeah. We will, for everybody listening in, this is going to be accountability for me and Sarah. Sarah and I are going to make the effort to get our group back together here in local Chattanooga marketplace and reconnect. I think that would be a good thing. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation today to kind of encourage that again. Let's go ahead and jump into kind of the primary conversation at hand though here. First of all, allowing or enabling our listeners and viewers to get to know you a little bit. You are based here in the Chattanooga market. Maybe just to get us started, one of the questions I normally go to, brand position. What is your photography business's brand position or unique value proposition here in the Chattanooga market?
So I consider myself a bright and vibrant photographer that sort of specializes in joyful couples who aren't used to being in front of the camera, maybe are a little bit uncomfortable, because sort of where I shine is getting people to come out of their shell just a little bit, and capture candid, timeless wedding images for them. So that's kind of where my little niche is, I guess.
Okay. And for everybody listening in, just for a little context, if you go to Sarah, SarahLarae, Sarah LaRae, photography.com. Of course, we'll link to this in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com when the audio version goes live as well. But you can go there, get an idea of Sarah's work. Beautiful work, by the way, Sarah, that's just kind of flashing across my screen here as we're looking at this. But you all make sure you go follow Sarah. And while we're talking about following, go to Sarah LaRae Photo on Instagram. We'll also link to that in the show notes, SarahLarae Photo on Instagram. And make sure you give Sarah a follow there as well. Sarah, I want to ask you something, though, about this, the brand position that you were just describing. One of the things that you mentioned, I've heard other photographers say this as well. You talk about photographing joyful couples. And normally when we make an assertion that we photograph this particular market segment or this type of person, it would suggest that there's an opposite to that, right? So if I photograph joyful couples, then that means that some photographers are photographing, I guess, unhappy couples. But I'm curious to get some context as to why you would say joyful specifically. How does that differentiate your brand?
I think because the word joyful to me conveys sort of a lightheartedness. And so what I'm not, sometimes when defining a style, especially, or defining who you are, sometimes it's easier to think about what you are not as opposed to what you are, at least in the beginning. And so I knew I'm not a dark and moody. I'm not a super serious person. I take my work seriously, but I don't take myself super seriously usually. So, people who are sort of, I felt like the word joyful resonated with people who are, sort of more
laid back, more happy-go-lucky.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's crazy because this past weekend I was at Riverbend, which is a local Chattanooga festival. Yeah. And Leslie Jordan was the MC, and I ended up on his Instagram, and Brandy Carlisle commented a joy bombing.
Really?
Calling me a joy bomber. And I was like, that's so on brand for me. That's amazing.
That's wild. Okay. So the idea there is twofold, I guess. That one, to communicate just the fact that you like to have fun. to that potential client, and then also that you want to work with somebody who's a little bit more lighthearted, who also wants to have fun. You're
Mm-hmm.
trying to connect with that type of client.
Mm-hmm.
And that, okay, so that makes a little bit more sense. Speaking of Joy Photo actually commented on Facebook, said, how do you convince timid or quiet clients to let loose and embrace the joyful attitude you talk about? And that's an interesting question. And I certainly want to let you answer this, Sarah, but
Sure.
I'm wondering too, though, if you have a brand position that says I photograph joyful couples, are those who tend to be more quiet or more timid going to come your direction as well? What are your thoughts on that?
I haven't had any oddly, I do tend to attract people who are a little bit more, at least shy, I guess is the word, or slow to warm,
Okay.
because
Slow to warm. I like
I,
that.
yeah,
Okay.
I have you're not supposed to call kids shy anymore, by the way. You're supposed to call them slow to warm.
Oh,
Anyway,
okay. Thank you for the education. That's good. Okay.
I don't know.
Continue.
My friend has a shy kid.
Okay.
So anywho, yeah. So I somehow I still attract couples like that, and I think it's because of word of mouth and referrals, but because I'm sort of kind of known for getting people to pull. And the way that I do that is, so anyway, people who are already naturally like bubbly and those people are great too. But I don't serve them as much as people who are a little bit more pulled back but want to be joyful, because they're like they have fear of vulnerability and lots of stuff that actually are some points for later on. But because those people, that need someone to pull themselves out of themselves, that's those are the kind of clients that I feel like I serve really, really well. And the way that I do that, to answer her question, his or her question, is I just make a fool of myself.
What does that actually look
So
like, Sarah? Please give us a detailed depiction or
monkey
description. Okay.
noises, just not being afraid to poke fun at myself, like, oh, look at me, I'm in a bush, well, whatever. Like, I'll do whatever I need to do. Like, I go for the easy laugh. I get that from my father. So, just making people feel comfortable by showing them that I'm just a human being. Like, we're just hanging out. Like, it is
Hmm.
not that serious. We are
Yeah.
taking pictures. Like, we don't have to be perfectly posed. We don't have to be, and also a big, it's making sure that they know they can trust me and that I'm going to tell them exactly what they need to do. And if they look dumb or stupid or bad, that I'm going to fix it. Like, they trust me for me to communicate with them.
Hmm.
And so then they can get a little more comfortable that way.
So, in order to be that way, you have to be comfortable with yourself, right? Because the idea of kind of putting us out ourselves out there in a way that's a little bit like off the wall, a little bit outside the box, a little crazy, quote unquote, requires a certain amount of confidence in order to do so. We're not worried about what this person thinks about us. We're being crazy for the sake of kind of pulling that side out of them as well. You seem quite comfortable with yourself, and I know this relates to the topic that we're going to get into a little bit later, about defining what success looks like for ourselves. But you seem super comfortable with yourself. Is that something that just comes naturally for you, or is it something you had to kind of work into?
No, I mean, I was a child that was slow to warm. I was actually shy and chronically insecure and very, if you looked at my parents, you would probably think that it was natural that I was always this way because I'm very much like both of my parents.
Okay.
They're both very extroverted and loud. um,
Shout out to Sarah's
but
parents.
yeah, my mom's probably watching this. She's like, "Oh God."
Hey, mom.
Um, um, so yeah, I was not. I mean, my mom used to say she hated me in middle school because I cried every day because I was just so like insecure, and it took me a lot. I was a late bloomer. I think it took me a long time to really be comfortable with myself. And I went through sort of a life change in my late 20s. I went through a divorce, and that experience gave me license to find myself, free myself, and demand to myself that I was going to be comfortable with
Hmm.
who I am and I
Hmm.
was going to live my life how I wanted to live it. I didn't have to answer to anybody else.
Hmm. That's okay. So let's park here for a second because, again, I think this is related to the later conversation, but I think it's super important for our industry because you see, and by the way, I'll say this from personal experience as well. You see a lot of insecurity in our photography industry. Just reading in a little bit to some of the posts on social media, you get a feel for a person or people, a lot of photographers who want or need the attention, who need somebody to kind of prop them up or make them feel better, and they look to social media to do that. So you can see it comes through kind of loud and clear in some cases, unfortunately. But it's also something, I say unfortunately, but something unfortunate because, again, I have personal experience with this where I'm letting, some would say I'm getting in my head, but ultimately a lot of it is just about insecurity. I'm not secure with some element or elements of myself. And I'm projecting then that experience onto the outside world. It's mixing with that. And there's all this drama, unnecessary drama ensues. And we also limit ourselves in our ability to be able to engage with our clients more effectively, especially like you're describing. So I think this is all super, super important. When you made that assertion for yourself, where you said, you know what, I'm not going to give the credit or the weight or the significance to other people's opinions that I used to, there's something significant to making that absolute choice internally to the point where you feel something emotionally and then you begin to act on it. But I'm curious what that process looked like for you. Like, what did it take to actually make that assertion and make that change and be able to kind of move forward? There's a book that I've mentioned before in the podcast. It's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. I'll fill in the blank there. But it's a
Read
really
that one,
powerful
yeah.
book and very much relates to this idea. Anyway, I've talked a lot. I want to hear what that experience was for you.
Well, therapy is helpful.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
that I think, that's part of it. I'm a big fan of Brene Brown.
Okay.
And so a lot of her work really speaks to me and has helped me. I came to her late though when I kind of initially went through that experience of getting confidence and believing in myself. I just, I think, I hate to like get so deep here with the divorce, but
We
it
should.
was
Yeah.
it was a tipping point in my life because I never thought I would be that person.
Hmm.
And so I never thought I would be a divorcee. I never thought I would be a divorced person. And prior to that happening to me, I had a lot of really ugly thoughts about people who are divorced. And so when that happened to me, I had this realization of like, I'm not that. Like, I'm not, that's not
Hmm.
all of these things that I thought about people who were divorced was
Yeah.
not who I was.
Yeah.
And so I just had this like eye opening moment of like, what everybody else thinks of me is none of my business. Like they have false that what they think is probably false because what
Hmm.
I believed about other people was so false before. Like I just don't give any like validity or energy towards what other people think. Now, a lot of people who know me will say, I wish I was more like you. You just don't care what people think about you or whatever. And I don't think that's necessarily true. It's not that I don't care. It's not that I don't care about what people think. I'm just very specific about what I want people to think about me.
Hmm.
And I'm very, and what I want people to think about me is very different, I think, than what a lot of people want people to think about them.
Okay. All right. So that's going to be a beautiful segue into our conversation about success here in just a little bit. So we'll go there. Everybody listening in, I know we've already gone deep, and I think this is really good because it sets us up for the conversation at hand. But I do have a few more questions for you, Sarah, before we
Sure.
get to that topic, defining success for ourselves. Talk to me a little bit about customer experience. Having run a photography business now for how many years?
7.
7 years. Okay, so lots of experience. What would you say is the big idea that has enabled you to provide the best possible customer experience for your clients?
Communication is key for me. I like to tell my clients that I need them to communicate what their expectations are so that I can make sure that I exceed those expectations.
Mm,
So, communication both ways. Clients communicating with me and then communicating with the clients and educating them about what they can expect from me, from their experience. So what, I've shot over 100 weddings. So, I just feel like it's my responsibility to educate them about how a wedding usually goes so that,
sure.
because you don't want to get to a wedding day and then they think it's going to go a certain way. And if we had just had a good conversation, I could have shared my knowledge and expertise with them, and they would have known that that was unrealistic from the beginning.
Sure.
So education and communication, I think, is key to creating a great client experience.
Yeah, for the sake of managing expectations. That's I'm old school taking notes with a notebook here, and I just wrote down the word expectations and circled it because that is what we're talking about. And it made me think of something. One of our biggest challenges at my editing company, Photographers Edit, is to effectively manage our clients' expectations. I guess that's really the case with any brand, but something especially as kind of particular and nuanced as editing and editing style, it becomes even more important that you manage the expectations of our clients, potential clients. The flip side of that, though, is something that you highlighted, or not even the flip side, but part of that process is effectively getting from that client or potential client what it is they think, what their preferences are, what they're looking for. But what I've learned, and we've been in business now for close to 15 years, what I've learned is that I may not be asking the right question in order to get that information, or maybe I am, but I'm not wording it in a way that resonates with that person. And so part of our process in managing our clients' expectations effectively has also been about learning how to ask the question or what questions to ask so we're getting the right information. What does that process look like for you? How have you learned to ask the right questions to your clients?
Yeah, that's a great question because I have questionnaires that I send my clients, and I have some particular questions. I think the sort of skill is asking a question that gives you more information than the client even realizes is giving you.
Mm,
So they answer the question and it tells you a lot of things. Like I ask on all my client calls, what what do you expect? What does the perfect wedding day photo look like to you? And they may think I'm just asking what photo they would like to hang in their house or whatever. But what I'm really asking is if they answer a photo of all my family that I never get to see, or a photo of me and my husband lost in a field, or you know, there are lots of ways to answer that question. You would think it would be similar across the board, but I get lots of different answers. And if they talk a lot about family, then I know, okay, their family is super important to them. I'm going to make notes about on the wedding day that I need to make sure I get lots of candids of their family. So it kind of tells me a lot about what their expectations are without and what's really important to their heart and what's going to be important on that wedding day without them even realizing that they're answering that.
hmm. And that seems like such a broad question, right? What is your ideal wedding day or what's your dream wedding? Because you're right, there's so many different answers that can come from it. Digging into that though, to truly understand what it is that they mean, do you ask a lot of follow-up questions or do you find
Yeah,
and
yeah. Sometimes honestly, I love that it's so open-ended because I think it is a hard question to answer. And I kind of preface it like this is, some of the questions are kind of difficult and you can take a minute to think about it.
yeah,
Um, but it just kind of tells me. And so the fact that it is so open-ended is why I get such an array of different answers. But like I
right.
said, I think it's what speaks to their heart. And that's important for me to know as a wedding photographer because I tell clients, I'm like, you would think that everybody kind of wants the same things. But surprisingly, when you really drill down and ask the right questions,
Hmm.
people have very different expectations about what they want.
So they give you that initial description, and like you said, it would invite a variety of answers, and then you just start to kind of dig down to the individual pieces of the answer to that
Mm-hmm.
question, just to better understand what it is that they mean.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
And that's something I usually ask on the initial client call and
mm,
then I ask lots of questions like after booking
smart.
and all that stuff. I have pretty and I tell people like I know this is a lot, it's pretty comprehensive, but it's important to me that I understand your expectations and we have to communicate with each other.
Sure, that totally makes sense. Okay, well, that's a good reminder. And for those of you listening and watching, it's I can't stress it enough. I've been in the industry now for about 20 years, and the significance of communication, number one, and making the effort to communicate consistently and in detail, super important. part of that process, as you highlighted, Sarah, is the process of managing expectations. It's so key for the sake of providing a great customer experience. So again, I'm glad that you highlight that. Let me jump to time management. Tell me something like a big idea that drives your ability to manage time so you aren't just working all the time. You've got a bit of personal life as well. What is that big idea for you?
So being really efficient with my time and having processes in place that I work well with having like specific processes that I do for every client or every
Hmm.
piece of my business so
Systems,
that I
yeah.
can almost go through like a list. And so that keeps me really efficient so I know where I am in the process for every client or just within the business itself. So that keeps me really efficient. And then as the other thing, I also have a little touch of ADHD. So
Okay.
my husband is like, I have a little bit of time blindness sometimes. So I'll just get like hyper focused, laser, and then time will just get away from me. And so my husband and I kind of have, he is helpful and supportive in that, he communicates with me, like if I'm too zoned in or if he's feeling a little bit neglected, like he has to tell me because I will just keep working until whatever time.
Yeah.
So, communication in a marriage is extremely key.
No, for sure, for sure. Yeah. Well, like there again is the management of expectations as well, right? Especially in the context of a relationship like that. But that's good. So having systems in place, things that you repeat over, like, or that you would do each time that you approach that particular task, that would essentially be what we
Hmm.
would call a system. Important to have systems in place. Delegation is also something that can save photographers a lot of time. The management of their business. This could be with email management, other administrative tasks, editing, certainly, album design, accounting. Have you experimented with delegation at all in your business? Have you found any success with that?
100%. In fact, I would say the last like year, yeah, definitely the last year, I have really embraced outsourcing on a whole nother scale
Okay.
that's enabled me to grow a lot more. Um, Outsourcing my editing, outsourcing my house cleaning, outsourcing. I delegate to my husband a lot of things. Um, so yeah, he knows that I'm good at delegating to him.
Nice.
So yeah, definitely have embraced that in my business. And I hired an assistant this year to help me with some of those things. And the nice thing about when I hired my assistant is I had all these systems. So it was kind of easy to like train her on what I needed her to do for me because I already had like very clear
Yep.
systems.
Yep.
So it was easy to outsource.
That's another really great point. So anybody listening in who's like, oh, I don't know if I should start delegating work or outsourcing work to somebody else, one of the most important ways to have success in delegation or outsourcing is to know what it is that you want before you go to delegate that thing. And you best know what you want when you've done the thing yourself, especially if you've created the system, Sarah, like you're talking about. And that is so, so important because the number of times that we've, I mean, hundreds, maybe even thousands at this point, that we've interacted with photographers over the years who came to us, they liked the idea of outsourcing their editing, but they weren't sure what they even wanted to begin with. And it creates a sense of frustration on the photographer's part because they're like, they just kind of send us the images crossing their fingers without communicating clearly, managing expectations like you talked about. And they get the thing back and then they're happy with it, but there's no way they really could be happy with it because they didn't know what they wanted in the first place. So that kind of
Hmm.
clarity about what it is that I want, what do I want out of this, what's the finished product or experience that I'm looking for is absolutely vital to a good experience. Not just delegating editing, but certainly album design or email management or any other element of our business. Super, super important that we're clear about what it is we're trying to achieve in that. So that's a really important. I mean, we could park there and talk about that for a while, but that's a
For
really
sure.
good reminder. I really appreciate you bringing us to that. One more question, and I want to get into our main topic here. Talk to me about an impactful self-help book, business book that has hit you hard in the last few years, something that you would want to recommend to our listeners.
So like I kind of mentioned, I already kind of name dropped Brene Brown, but she has a lot of books, but The Gifts of Imperfection, and Atlas of the Heart. are two books of hers that really spoke to me in my emotional journey. And so definitely those, and Atomic Habits is probably another one that has really been helpful for me in the last like year or so.
Atomic Habits. What was the other one? I have Gifts of Imperfection from Brene Brown pulled up on screen. What was the
Uh-huh.
other one you mentioned?
Atlas of the Heart.
Atlas of the Heart. Got it.
Hmm.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got that here. So for anybody who's live streaming, of course, you can see this on screen. Atlas of the Heart, Mapping Meaningful Connection in the Language of Human Experience. Then the other one that we looked at, of Imperfection, also by Brene Brown. And then Atomic Habits. That's one that's come up quite a bit here on the podcast. Super
Yeah.
popular for sure. And that's by James Clear. Atomic Habits, an easy and proven way to build good habits and break bad ones. So
Hmm.
that's good. Okay. So we're going to put these in the show notes, Sarah. I appreciate you sharing that. And by the way, for anybody listening in or watching, if you go to Boca Bookshelf, just like it sounds, BOKEH, bookshelf.com, we have a collection of the most popular recommendations on the podcast thus far. I think you're going to see all the highlights there. So go check that out as well. Just a little side note if anybody's looking for something to read along with these recommendations from Sarah. Okay. Sarah, we're going to get into the topic at hand. We have a lot to cover here on this topic.
Sure.
We're going to talk about defining or personalizing the definition of success for ourselves. And it is kind of an interesting thing that almost a sickness, if you will, that we've gotten into as human beings and first world culture where we have a tendency to compare ourselves to another person, kind of judge our success based on our comparison to another person when really it doesn't make sense to do so, right? The context isn't even the same. So it's kind of a broken thought process to begin with. But what do you think has driven that tendency in our culture? What's the psychology behind it?
I freaking love this question because I could literally talk. Anybody who knows me in real life, they're like, "This is Sarah loves to talk about this." Um, I something I see a lot in other people is that they have their self-esteem solely rooted in comparison. So, like, they're constantly using other people's experiences, opinions, and presentations as a measuring stick for their own life and to determine their own value. And they're always looking outward instead of inward to sort of validate who they are, what they're doing, if what they are wearing looks good, to what career choice they've chosen, like all the things they use. Like, okay, if I'm doing this and someone else is doing this, then that means I'm okay. And I think it's kind of rooted in like this human need for belonging,
Hmm.
to fit in. That's like an innate thing. And so I think the natural thing in your brain is to compare yourself to others to make sure that you're fitting in, to make sure
Interesting.
you fit in that box.
Okay.
Um, and that's a well documented like innate need that human beings seem to have. And it takes an immense amount of bravery, courage, and introspection to overcome that, I think. But I think only great things come from having the courage to stand out and to not necessarily fit in, to do what your heart's telling you to do instead
Hmm.
of trying to fit into whatever box that the world's telling you should fit into.
Interesting. I and I'm by the way, I'm not just throwing out the word interesting there just to fill in the blank. Like it's truly interesting to me. I don't think I'd ever considered it this way. That the idea when we're talking about success, and we as individuals are comparing ourselves to other people's so-called success, it's not necessarily a matter of trying to raise the bar for ourselves as much as we're just trying to feel comfortable or feel like we're part of something similar to someone else. A need
Hmm.
for belonging in some way. That's an interesting take. Where did you learn that perspective? You just gotta for anybody who's not live streaming, you didn't see the face that Sarah just made, which was like, I don't know.
It's just an observation. I think as women, especially, I don't know, it's probably true for men too. But from my perspective, I was great at the comparison game. Being someone who was a late bloomer, so to speak, and somebody who was really shy and extremely self-conscious
Mm.
and self-deprecating and just had all this negative self-talk, and someone who came from that sort of perspective and had to grow, or at least wanted to grow, because I didn't like myself like that and I wanted to be happy. I think you have to, like, you know, observe other people. I see a lot of people that play the comparison game a lot. I totally understand where they're coming from because I used to be that person. And so it's interesting to me. I think I have a big, when you go through something and you sort of, you know, metamorph yourself, metamorph, I don't know the word, but you go through change and you look back at who you were. When you've had major change in your life, I think you end up being a little more introspective and also be able to see it in other people. And when you see it in someone else, you can make observations about that experience that you couldn't make when you
Yeah,
were going
true.
through it.
Yeah, 2020 hindsight, right? But you said something though that I want to kind of pause and discuss for a second. I want to get your take on this because I think a lot of how we address a potential problem in our lives has to do with the way that we frame it. If we turn it into something way bigger than it actually is, there's a tendency that we might have to avoid doing something about it, right? And you talked about how
Right.
it takes, you use the word bravery to kind of move beyond this thought process and to be confident in ourselves and be okay with our definition of success. And I cringe a little bit because in my mind, like bravery is like a soldier on a field who's under fire and goes and saves his friend. Like that's true bravery. And I feel like we've kind of softened in our society a little bit to the notion that something like this, which is a change that we have to make internally, requires bravery. And if we frame it that way, that maybe we're making it too big a deal in our mind, and that will keep us from being able to move forward more effectively. But that's kind of my hard ass perspective. I'm curious about your perspective on that.
You call it hard ass, I call it testosterone.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, I think, okay, so at risk of sounding like somebody who does like a lot of hallucinogens or smokes weed, which I do neither of those things. But I do feel like sometimes my perspective gets a little existential when it comes to stuff like this.
Sure.
But I think that to be the real, yes, people who go out and save other people's lives, that's still, that's almost like a fight or flight response. And so, yes, while that is brave, I think we have to think of ourselves as heroes of our own lives, in order to, live and have the strength to pull through sometimes, because life is hard. We may not be on a battlefield, but I also think I have a perspective that the human brain is not evolving as fast as technology is allowing us to, which is one of
Sure.
the reasons that I have. Um, I think one of the reasons that I think that we have a lot of depression, anxiety, a lot of mental health issues in 2022 is not necessarily because humans are getting soft. It's just that technology is evolving at a rate that we have not seen ever in the history of humankind. And it is allowing us a lot more space within our brains that were previously dedicated to actual survival
Mm.
and feeding ourselves and clothing ourselves and all those things. We have all this space now, because technology does so much of the work of existing
Yeah.
for us.
Yep.
So we have so much space, and it's like, what do we do with this? We're not really like doing what we were evolved or built or born, or however you view it from your belief system, to do. And so we're just kind of in this weird place in human history, I think.
No, it's actually a great point. But I think to that very point, the fact that we've got it so easy has naturally made us softer. We do have more time, more space to give to, unfortunately, sitting around thinking about ourselves and what we think about something and how we feel about this thing and should we do this. And again, I raise my hand, both my hands. I've been so terrible with this, and I'm continuing to learn how to kind of shift away from that approach to life because it's very narcissistic, like egocentric, that we're constantly thinking about ourselves and how we feel about something, and it just gets in the way at the end of the day of being able to actually just live, like to truly appreciate what's around us, the people around
Right.
us, what we've been given. And I think it gets in the way. And just to kind of bring it back around, that's why I tend to push back, because I feel like we've built up these choices at the end of the day that are literal, like internal choices. I don't have to go fight fires. I don't have to go protect my friend on the battlefield. I don't have to fight starvation. I don't have to do any of these crazy things that some people still have to deal with on a daily basis. I have to make a choice internally, and it's a big deal. It's a big shift in my life. I'm going to feel uncomfortable, but I'm just wondering if we frame it as such a big deal that we're calling it brave or heroic to do something that, frankly, in comparison to what a lot of people have to deal with, isn't that big of a deal. If maybe maybe that would enable us to move forward a little bit more easily. I could be wrong. A lot of people are kind of stuck in their own context and they don't have that outside perspective. But I just wonder,
I
what do you think?
think I think that a person who has struggled with self-esteem needs the encouragement to feel like they are being brave. Otherwise, they need to feel um, like what they're doing is meaningful.
Sure, sure.
I think just so sports analogy, not every player on baseball, basketball, football, whatever, it can be coached in the same way, right? Like
It's
different
true.
people learn and are coached, respond to different styles differently.
Hmm.
And I think the same thing goes for life. So like something that resonates and with me and I respond to positively in my life and gives me encouragement and gives me meaning may not apply in the same way to you because you were born into a different situation, you had different things affecting you, you have different struggles in your own journey.
Yeah.
um and so I don't think there's any wrong way to live, like
Yeah, I'm not
whatever
suggesting it's
speaks
wrong
to
as
you.
much as just potentially limiting, right? Because the way that we frame something. In fact, I've mentioned it before in the podcast, but I have, for anybody who's live streaming with us, if I can turn my arm the right way, I've got this tattoo on my left wrist, which is the word kakushin in Japanese, which is the word belief. And when we begin to understand that literally everything that we do on a day-to-day basis is driven by a belief or set of beliefs, and I'm not talking about religious belief system. I just mean literally, like I believe that this stand-up desk that I'm at right now is going to hold up my phone, so I put my phone down, and fortunately, my belief was rooted in fact, right? So now it's sitting there.
Sure. Yeah.
But there are also plenty of beliefs that we have in our lives that aren't rooted in anything other than a projection of our own personal psychological issues onto the world. And unfortunately, due to those, in many cases, we tend to frame something in a way that inhibits us. It's not that it's wrong. It's psychological baggage, for lack of a better description. So I'm not suggesting it's wrong as much as, hey, is this really what is going to be the most enabling belief system or thought process in this situation? If we build this thing up to be so big that we're looking at it like this grandiose idea that we might make a change in our life, which if we hadn't framed that way, we might have been more apt to make a little bit more quickly. I know this is kind of
But
nuanced, but
sure, and I hear you, and I get, and I don't necessarily think wrong might be the wrong term, so to speak. But I guess what I mean is what resonates. There's no, just like I said before, like what resonates with you, like because to me, I need big goals to chase. That's me. I need to feel like I'm doing something meaningful, and I need big goals to chase in my life in
yeah.
order to feel satisfaction.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean that I don't still have mindfulness. That doesn't mean that I don't still live in today. Like there's always this like, and especially for somebody or anybody with ADHD, most people are either on or they're off, and people like to talk in extremes. But the reality of life is that it's mostly gray. And so, I don't think it has to be either. I think that you are correct that for some people, thinking of it as brave and a big thing might be inhibitory for them. But for other people, they need to believe that they are brave. They need to believe that they have courage in order to move forward. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody needs that.
Oh, sure. No, I wouldn't think so. But I just think that we've moved in our culture toward this tendency to, well, like you pointed out earlier, so brilliantly, actually, that we somehow need some significance in the feeling that this thing that we're doing is a big accomplishment. And then we want everybody on social media to prop us up because we did the thing. So we got to talk about it there too. There is a lot of insecurity that's driving some of this behavior. Again, I'm totally guilty of it. So this is not preaching by any means. In fact, Andres actually makes an interesting point on YouTube. He says, don't forget the fear is real, regardless if the issue is real or imaginary. So it will take bravery to overcome that fear. And yeah, absolutely, Andres. I think maybe the best example I can give here, Sarah, is I love to fly. And I've flown many, many, many miles in my life since the time I was a very young kid living overseas. I love to fly, but I still get at times unusually nervous about turbulence. And a lot of it, I think, harkens back to an experience that I had when I was a kid and a story that I heard about some terrible turbulence. And it was during a time of my life and in a circumstance where there's a lot of emotional volatility, shall we say. And so my brain just kind of latched onto that. And ever since that, and it's so weird. Again, these are the weird belief systems that we develop, right? I heard that story. I latched onto it psychologically. And since that time, I have this kind of innate fear when I'm flying, when I begin to feel turbulence, that I'm like, oh, shoot, is this going to turn into something really terrible? And I exist in this state of fear unnecessarily. And it's rooted in a belief or a series of beliefs that have developed as a result of this experience that I had. And the idea that I would go choose to fly, for example, in that circumstance, that's not bravery on my part. That's just simply reality and logic, right? When we look at it at the very root level, that there's a less chance of me getting hurt and certainly the plane crashing than if I were to get hit by, lightning or something like that. I mean, like the chances of anything happening are 0 to none. And yet I've built up this ridiculous fear that takes over my body at times because I've allowed that belief system to fester, to develop to the point where it is my reality. So as Andres points out, like we may be dealing with fears. Those fears are real to us. They're significant to us. And I don't want to minimize that. But the flip side of that too, I'm wondering is if we give so much significance to whatever the thought process is, that it might inhibit us in some way. So this is more of a thought exercise. And I really love your perspective about it.
I love thought exercise.
It's really good. But I want to keep moving in the conversation too, because, part of what enables us to define success is to move beyond maybe some belief systems that are inhibiting us in one form or another,
Sure.
Personally or professionally. I'm curious what that experience looked like for you, or what that transition looked like for you, where you went from this place that you were and you alluded to it earlier, so concerned about what other people thought, to kind of moving out of that. Can you describe that in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, so I think, like I said before, like kind of doing a lot of introspection and, going to therapy and reading all the self-help books and everything to kind of like help get myself out of that headspace. But the big game changer for me was like refusing to talk to myself in a way that I would not talk to a friend.
Interesting.
Was huge. Like, why would I treat myself like I would never talk to my friend like that? Like, why am I talking to myself that way? Um, and so, positive self-talk was a big game changer for me in getting to shift my belief about myself and believing in myself and what I'm capable of and can accomplish. Because, when you come from a place of being insecure, starting small changes can make huge differences in your life. Um, so that was sort of the beginning of that for me. And then, like I said, going through and starting to observe other people and their behaviors and why they are that way. Because, like I said, it's easy to look at other people's lives and sort of analyze them. That's one of my favorite things to do.
And then learn from it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Because then I can like see why they're that way
Hmm.
and apply it to my own life going forward. So just changing the way that I think about myself and not allowing myself to be negative towards myself was really huge.
And before that point where that kind of shift began to happen, how did you define the word success?
So within my business, I defined success as quitting my job. So for background, I graduated. I kind of did in my life of being insecure. I just made decisions in my life that made me fit in, so to speak, that were
Hmm.
like sensible. I never really stopped. I didn't have the, I don't think I had the courage or believed in myself enough to really even ask myself what I wanted from my life. I was just like, well, this is what everybody else does, so this is what I'm going to do, and didn't
Interesting.
really question it.
And was that just
And
like
so,
an effort to fit in, like we were talking about earlier?
yeah, I
Okay.
think so. A lot of it was an effort to fit in, and representation is important. I did not see other people from my same background, similar situations, do anything other than just get a job that they didn't hate and
Hmm.
get married and have children and all those things. So
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have, I felt like a model of someone who is really like living their life the way they wanted to live it. And I might have just been blind to it. I'm sure there was people in my life that were like that. But nobody really that was significant in my life. You just, we didn't grow up with much money. It was just always survival mode. And so I just got married at 19 and I graduated. I went to pharmacy school and became a pharmacist at 23 and was in the healthcare system working in a hospital. And I got really, went through my divorce. And then after my divorce was over and I was trying to figure out who I wanted to be in my life, that's when I found photography and started my business. So then I was really laser focused on becoming a successful photographer. I'd already accomplished the pharmacy thing, whatever. And so now I was like, okay, I want to be a successful photographer. And for me in the beginning, that meant that I was going to get to leave healthcare because I was really frustrated and jaded with the healthcare system. I was really dissatisfied in my job at the time when I started my business. And I was like, this is the dream, this is success. So to answer your question, that's in the beginning what I thought success was going to look like, or what I thought the definition was at the time.
And then how did that change? Like, how would you today define the notion of success?
So for me, that change, I had people at the hospital like, so especially as my business grew and I kind of started like gaining traction a little bit and I was really busy, they were like, when are you going to quit? And I was like, people ask me that. And all of a sudden I was like, I don't want to quit. I don't. And when I had that realization that that was my answer to their question, I was like, wait a minute. I thought that that's what I wanted. Like, why don't I want to quit? And then, of course, had to do some self reflection and introspection. And I realized that I like being a multi-passionate person. I like having multiple jobs. I don't
By
have
the way,
children.
I like the word multi-passionate. I think that's the first time I've heard that on the podcast. That's a good word. Please continue.
Yeah. So I like having multiple income streams. I like my job as a pharmacist and I like being a photographer and I don't have to choose because I don't, this is what I want. I can decide what I want my life to look like. And the insecurity kind of creeped in when I would go to some of these like, networking events or whatever, and people would immediately, oh, are you full time? And I'm like, does that mean? Like, because I felt like they were judging me. Like, if you're not full time in your business, you're not
uh,
either taking it seriously or you're not making enough money. But
yeah.
here's the reality: the only thing I like better than making money is spending money. So, I mean, that's just the truth. So, I, I make as much in my photography business as I do as a photographer. And the thing about being full time is for some people, you could
Wait,
go full
you said you make
time
as much in your photography business as you do making.
as a
Oh,
pharmacist.
as a pharmacist. You said photographer. Okay. All right. Cool.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're worries.
Sorry. So I could do either. And for some people, it's like, to go full time means you make 50K. For some people, going full time means you need to make 100K. For some people, going full time means, well, I need to make 200K. Like everybody has different lifestyles,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
that's what that question is a dumb question in my
Hmm.
opinion.
Hmm.
Because whether or not you can afford to go full time in your business depends on what kind of lifestyle that you want to live. Like if I want to make 250, 300,000 to maintain a certain lifestyle, that means that, I can't quote go full time until I'm making 2 or 300K in my business,
Hmm.
which for someone else, they may only need to get to 50K. So it's
Right.
like, it's just an ambiguous question. Um, that I think in the beginning I'm kind of passionate about it a little bit because it kind of made me fall when people ask me that question. It kind of made me fall back into some old habits like in my head
Comparison.
about yeah, comparison and things that I thought that I had overcome. Honestly, started to sort, and I think that's a lesson there as well. It's like you never beat mental health issues. You or at least thought processes in your brain. Like you don't you constantly have to like readdress them. You have to and never, I work a lot in the addiction population and it's very similar. You never beat addiction. Like you're just always a recovering addict. And
Hmm.
it's kind of the same thing when it comes to like addictive type of thought processes that are negative. It's they're always going to come back. They will always creep, but you got to have coping mechanisms and new skills to be able to fight them off each and every time they creep up.
Yeah, I would even argue that the coping mechanisms only last for so long in many cases, especially in addictive situations. Whereas I think it's a shift in thought process that really
Sure.
makes the big. I mean, you're describing the shift in thought process that happened for you, that enabled you to
Mm.
move beyond the kind of cultural definition of success to something that was specific to you. That required a thought process. You could have, you could have avoided looking at Instagram, so you stopped comparing yourselves against other people. That's a
Yeah.
coping mechanism. It's a shift in thought process that is not only more healthy, but is ultimately going to be longer lasting. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. That's an interesting conversation we could also spend a lot of time on. But that being said, let's talk about kind of those practical steps. I'd love for our listeners to walk away with something that's super actionable. You mentioned to me before we got started that you've got kind of 4 steps that you took that enabled you to make that shift to defining success for yourself. And I'd love for you to share those with our listeners, if you will.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about doing a lot of emotional growth and self-reflection. Like, we've had a little bit of a debate about the definition of courage or bravery, but I think that it is a scary thing to look yourself in the mirror. I don't think anybody would argue with that. Really looking at yourself and opening yourself up to critique, so to speak, in any respect is hard. And so, but you have to do it. Like that's where you grow as a person.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of emotional growth and self reflection and really having really difficult conversations with yourself or maybe a therapist. Um, I'm a huge advocate for therapy,
For sure.
obviously.
For sure.
And I had to ask myself, what do I want my life to look like? Just kind of like writing it down. What do I want my life to look like? And almost have tunnel vision and only focus on what your heart's telling you. Um, and block out the noise. Determine what makes your heart sing. Don't give insignificant people significance in your life. Your life is about you, and what other people think of you is simply none of your business. Um, so really looking inward and focusing on what you want your life to look like. And this is a question that I ask myself frequently, and sort of when I'm making decisions about whether or not I'm on the right path. Is if I were to die tomorrow and couldn't tell anyone that I was going to die, like it's not like we're going to have some kind of like touchy feely whatever session. Like you can't tell anybody you're going to die, but you're
Okay.
going to die tomorrow. What would you want today to look like? Or if you want to be less morbid about it, like think of all your favorite memories in your life and where were you? Who were you with? because that's where your heart is. That is what's going to tell
Mm,
you what success really is and what's going to provide you real sustainable happiness. If it's on a mountaintop, is it on the beach? Is it working in your field? Is it helping impoverished children? Like whatever that looks like for you, that's going to help guide you to find what your definition of real success is. And I think it's important to have that. I'm a goal oriented person. And so having that idea of what success is going to look like for you and what you want for your life is really important to help keep you on track to living your best life, to that. And for me, simply having what I want my life to look like and really my true definition of success now is to have the freedom of my time to do whatever I want. you know, to have the freedom of being able to go to Disney World 3 times a year, to be able to spend days off with my dogs and my husband, that's what success for me at this point looks like, is
mm.
being empowered and having the freedom to do whatever I want to do and be authentic and unapologetic about that.
Well, and that having that clarity about what it is that you're trying to achieve comes from, and I was taking notes here again on my notebook. So you said start with self-reflection. So we have to start with self-reflection, understanding kind of the psychology that drives us. And certainly if we need to get a therapist involved to help with that, that's a good thing to do as well. Secondly, ask, what do I want? So now I understand the psychology driving me, the things that are most valuable to me, my values, the things that bring me the most joy and fulfillment. And then just very simply asking and answering that question, what is it that I want? And being clear about that. Then third, block out the noise. And then fourth, don't give significance to insignificant people. I think those two things kind of go hand in hand, but it is easy to allow ourselves to get distracted by so many. It's that paradox of choice, right? There's so many options right now. If we go scroll whatever social media platform, you see all these possibilities for what life could look like. And it's easy to get sucked down one rabbit hole or another and then do that comparison thing. But if we take a step back into the quiet and take the time for self-reflection, be clear about what it is that we're trying to achieve, it's a lot easier then to filter out that noise and not give significance to the insignificant people in our life. I think that's good perspective. I really appreciate you sharing this.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's my sort of like goal in life is I feel I feel like I've reached a point where I have got a really great perspective and happiness and a feeling of peace and mindfulness. And I just want everybody, I've been there. I've been in the dark places. I've been in struggle and all that. And I feel like I've come to the other side of it. And I am always happy to, I mean, I still have, work to do and things to learn. I'm only 35 years old. I don't know everything, but, I just want other people to know that you don't have to live in a feeling of the comparison game and I'll never be that, or I'll always, I'll never reach my goals, or this photographer is better than me. I'll never be as good as they are. Whatever. You don't have to live that way. Like you can be yourself authentically and be successful and live a very happy life.
I think that's a pretty good summation of the conversation.
Yeah, it is. Boom.
I appreciate it, Sarah. Well, for those of you listening in, I'm going to pop this up here on screen. Sarah, remind us all of your website and then Instagram as well.
Yeah, SarahLaRaePhotography.com, and I'm at Sarah LaRae Photo on Instagram. Check me out.
Check her out. Make sure you follow. Ask her a question or two, too. If some of these elements of the conversation spurred some thoughts, some ideas, some questions, shoot her a DM. And Sarah, again, I really appreciate you making time to share with our listeners both your perspective and ultimately what is really practical, actionable advice. I thank you for that.
Of course.
All right, everybody listening in, thanks for joining in. Thanks for live streaming with us. And if you missed the live stream, obviously you can go to Facebook or youtube.com/Boca Podcast. Come join us for the next one. Follow us on Instagram at Boca Podcast to find out about that next live stream. All right, y'all have a wonderful day. Thanks, Sarah.